Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Gemma Bonfil. I'm the happy publisher of Joe. I'd like to thank Fundación Telefónica for hosting us, and I'd like to say hello to Marina Sanmartín and thanks for helping us in this session with Joe. And I'd like to thank Joe for coming to Spain to promote the jealousy man. I'll give you a short introduction, although this author needs no introduction. He's got 18 adult novels. 12 of them are the Harry Hole series. And he might need some presentation, this book, The Jealousy Man, because after 18 books, Joe has touched a genre he had not worked before, which is short stories. In The Jealousy Man, you'll find 12 short stories in 2 blocks. The first block is about jealousy, and the second one is about power. In this book, Joe, in addition to doing what he knows what to do, he touches some new keys that we had not seen before, like horror stories, also anticipation topics, and some fields that he had not touched before. He has done a very great work. I'd like to be brief because Marina has many questions for Joe, so I'd like to welcome both of them, and I'd like to tell you that after this session we'll have a Q&A session where you can ask any questions about this book. And so I give you the floor, guys.
Pues,
well, thank you very much, Jaume, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to interview Joe. And first of all, I would like to highlight that this is a very particular book in his career. He will tell us more about this, but it's not only because this is a book of tales, which is a little bit against the stream, so to speak, but also short tales are a more difficult genre, and that probably they did not reach the readers so much, but through the pandemic maybe it has settled down, so to speak. And sometimes we see that in the industry that authors are requested to write more and more pages, and somehow you decided to write instead shorter tales. Why did you make this decision, and why now?
Well, I sort of been having over the years some ideas for short stories, and it's not like I sit down and I make decisions on what to write based on, number of pages or what the market is looking for. It's all about ideas, and these ideas for this collection of short stories happen to be, well, short stories. Simple as that. I think it's some of them. I think it's much like when you make an album, that you have some songs and you think that the album is going to be those songs that you have already recorded or written, but then you go into studio and you realize that you have some other songs that you want to record and that you're writing at the time. So I guess this collection was the idea for the collection was sparked by a few stories that I had, and then I got so enthusiastic about the idea of publishing a collection that I sat down and I wrote perhaps 70% of the short stories are new stories, and the others are older stories.
Could we say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this is above all a book about the first principles, as Hannibal Lecter would say, because when I was reading each of the tales, they reminded me of many values and basic concepts. And in fact, the book is divided in two blocks. One of them is related to jealousy, and the other one is related to power. Why these two topics and not memory or revenge, which are also topics that are very present in your stories and of which we will also speak more later?
Well, I think that the motive of jealousy is certainly related to the motive of revenge. So I do think there's a link there, and there's also a link between jealousy and power. I think that if you look at the world today, what we see, maybe in contrast to what we've seen in the ever since last World War, is that you have nations and powerful nations being run and led by so-called strong individuals, strong leaders, or crazy leaders, if you like. And I think that there's I studied economic history, and we will always learn that wars and conflicts stemmed from economic conflicts, that it was sort of a undercurrent of events that eventually led to a war, and I mean that is how you explained at least World War II and some other wars. But I think it's you're then underestimating the factor of the strong leader, that there are actually leaders who want to leave a footprint, to build a statue in memory of their achievements. And I think you have seen that in the world for the last 10 years, and you definitely are seeing that right now. And so you also have to look at what are the motives of these leaders. And I think that competition for being the great leader and envy and jealousy is also part of that. So the stories are sort of the jealousy part of it is probably short stories written in the tradition of the crime novel, the Agatha Christie type of story, while the power section is leaning more towards science fiction. Actually, it's more like in the tradition of my great idol in science fiction when I was young, Ray Bradbury.
Me encantaba también.
I loved him too, and he's one of my idols as well. It's true that the book revolves around two layers. The one that is more evident, the one that we see in tales such as The Island of the Rats. But there's also another layer that is more related to the individualistic side of it that we see in the Jealousy Man tale, for instance. When I was reading the book, I felt that this was the book that we could say it's the more honest book that you've written. I think I could see the struggle of the author, the fact of being honest with oneself was on those pages. I remember in one interview you mentioned that you were once a jealous man. Is this a book in which you would say you really undressed your soul more than in others?
I'm not sure. I think it's impossible to write anything without, at some level, undressing. But of course, I maybe when you deal with emotions like jealousy and you try to write of a protagonist who is jealous, you have to dig deep inside yourself and bring to the surface your own experiences of jealousy. I've probably never been a very jealous man, but I know what jealousy is. I've had those emotions, and like I guess most people, if there is one emotion that if you had to remove or amputate one emotion within yourself, take it away from your repertoire of emotions, it would be jealousy. I mean, it's hard to find, any use for that emotion. It's purely negative. And I mean, most of our emotions, like anger, it also can spark some positive energy. It can make you able to change things, to break out of old patterns, stuff like that. Jealousy is like it's totally useless. I guess that, of course, all our emotions have some reason for being there, some evolutionary reason for being there, and I guess jealousy may be a man, securing that he will mate with a woman, so he has to fight off all his rivals. But I think in a modern society, it doesn't really make sense. And that is perhaps why I think it's a fascinating emotion to write about, because being on one hand so useless, it's still so powerful, and it motivates so many of our actions. So it's as if the way we are constructed mentally is out of touch with the society that we have created. And I think that's interesting, that conflict between society and the individual.
Sí, yo creo
I also believe that it's an emotion that is very much related with Shakespeare. I think that we see all these soft tones and dark tones in your stories, and despite this reflection that you just made, that I think is very accurate, most of the stories are being narrated from the viewpoint of the jealous person, of the murderer, of the criminal, and the reader is even bound to empathize with this character. And this is something that calls my attention from literature in general, and in particular from the jealousy man. How can we actually take sides with the bad character and manage to make him into a nice character?
Well, I think it's very simple and easy. In one way, you write from the first person's point of view. I think that as soon as you start a sentence with yo, with I think it's you automatically you will trying to sympathize with that person, to get on the same frequency as that person. So I think that you have that in so many stories. My maybe favorite crime author, Jim Thompson, he would write about psychopaths and sociopaths, and the troubling thing was that he used the first person. That was the sociopath, and suddenly you were sitting there reading a book sympathizing with the sociopath and realizing that you are rooting for the wrong team. You are rooting for Barcelona when you're in Madrid. I mean, it's so you but it's interesting. I mean, it's more challenging for the writer to try to cross that line into the dark side, maybe. I mean, if you look at Godfather, for example, it's a classic trick of spending the first 20 minutes to make sure that you sympathize with Michael Corleone, Al Pacino, and then you don't realize at the end of the movie when he is totally corrupt, he's deceiving everybody he's cooperating with. He's the worst mafioso of them all. And in the end, he even lies to his wife. Still, when you leave the cinema and you ask people, who was the hero of this movie, they say Michael Corleone. Well, he's not. But you've been tricked into believing that. And I think that is interesting. You can do that in storytelling, manipulate people into rooting for the wrong side. Which means that you are forced to look at society, look at crime, look at individuals in another way that you would otherwise have done. I think that for me, some writers like Stieg Larsson, for example, he will signal very early on in his book his political agenda. which means that he will divide the audience into they who already support his political views and drive away those who don't agree. And that is fair. You can make great stories doing that, but you are, as the saying goes, talking to the churchgoers. So I prefer to try and talk to everybody and hope that they come to the stories with an open mind.
Otra faceta
A different aspect related to jealousy that I've also seen when you included in the two stories that I want to ask you about next is the jealousy that we can feel as a society. There are two short stories in the book which are Garbage and the Cure. That are related to people seeking shelter in a different country and they feel rejected from their environment. Why are we so afraid? Why are we so against the people that we don't see, that have just arrived, to migrants, to refugees?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we have to realize that it's natural. It's not like people are evil, fearing what is different. I think it more stems from that people are worried, and that you, for example, now I just bought an apartment in Malaga. It's a beautiful city, but I can also feel that there's people living in Malaga who has been living there for generations. They are worried that Malaga will turn into the next Barcelona, just tourists coming, from everywhere. Me being one of them, and I can sort of understand that, looking at it from that perspective, that they are worried that there's a lot of people coming here and they are going to change our way of life. On the other hand, it's of course also a question of privileges. I mean, living like in Norway, we are so privileged that we have a responsibility to share our good luck economically, with the rest of the world in some way. So you have to accept that people are coming to Norway for economic reasons. People are saying, well, we built up this country, from the ground, and now there are people coming here and they are using our social system. Why can't they, make a living where they come from? Well, if you go back 2 generations, people were fleeing from Norway, traveling to the United States to make a better life for themselves, and they were met with open arms. So today, the way I see it, today it's them. Yesterday it was us. Who will it be tomorrow? But I do think that you have to sort of understand the feelings that is underlying those partly aggressive or negative emotional responses to people coming to different countries, and you feel invaded. I don't think you can solve the problem if you don't realize that there's very human reasons for that. And I mean, again, evolutionary, if you look at it, we are born with being suspicious of strangers, people who look, smell, and speak differently from what we do. We prefer what we know. It makes us feel secure. That's natural. That it's natural doesn't mean we have to accept it and follow those automatic reactions. But I'm repeating myself. We have to understand that it's there.
Sí.
We were talking about Norway, and Garbage takes place in Oslo. But another aspect that is very appealing from the book is the diversity of scenarios that we can see. There are some stories that take place in Milan, in California, in Kalymnos. How does the place, the location, influence what you're telling?
It's hard to tell. I think that I like stories that has a strong sense of place and time, and perhaps more of place. I've been traveling. I spent all my money traveling from when I was 17 years old, and when I started working, most of my friends were working, and when I stopped working or having a real job and was writing full time, I had the chance to travel, but then my friends, they were all busy working, so I started traveling alone. And that was, I realized that you have an even stronger sense of place if you go somewhere by yourself. Then you're always the outsider looking in. You're not in a group where you can sort of socialize inside the group. And I love doing that. I love traveling to Hong Kong or to Bangkok or to Madrid, and sort of try to just walk around and sit around and try to figure out what is this place all about, what makes people here tick, what are the unwritten rules of this place. And of course you can never be 100% insider, but I was never really interested in being an insider. I always enjoyed the role of being outside looking in. I think I've always been curious in that way, and so when I'm writing about Greece here in this book, Kalymnos is a place I've been traveling there for 10 or 12 years, so I know the place quite well. So I do write about something I know, but still as an outsider. And also, I mean, there's a story here from Pamplona and San Sebastian, and I've been going there too for the bull runs, and so I have some experience. But as a writer of fiction, you can partly use something that is there, and you can partly come up with things. Like it's the same thing with Oslo in the Harry Hole novels. It's 90% realistic, it's there, but it's sort of it's a Gotham City version of Oslo. And in these short stories, I think I do the same with Pamplona and Milano and some of the other places.
Sí. Una de las cosas que...
One of the things that this allows you to do, the slight changes of the place allows you to do, is that you can choose the dystopian version for some of these stories. It's a close dystopia that some of us, even if we get to be 100 years old, might get to see, but it's a very pessimistic type of future, because most of the stories that are located in a near future, justice, the morale and the ethics are in danger. We tend to chaos. We are threading into the path of the Lord of the Flies, like in a William Golding style. Do you think that we're going towards chaos and that we're going to lose all the principles that protect us?
I don't think so. I mean, like you said, these stories are quite... it's dystopia, but in the long run, I'm optimistic. I mean, if you look at the last 10 years, you may be a pessimist if you look at the leaders that people have been voting for the last 10 years. But if you look at history for the last 100 or 150 years, there's less wars, there's less conflicts, there's less murder, there's less violence, there's progress for different races, genders, sexual orientation. You have progress in so many areas. So if you take 2 steps back, it's reason to be optimistic. And you said that we can live 100 years without having to deal with situations like this. But I doubt that is true. I think that actually the normal situation is that during a lifetime you will experience war or some kind of conflict. I mean, here in Spain there's still people living who remembers the Civil War, and after that you had Second World War, and and also in my country, you know, which is a very peaceful country, my parents or my generation before me, of course, remembers war. And so I think that in many ways we are the exception. We are a generation that has not experienced war, but now we are, of course, getting very close to experience war, and there are parts of Europe, Yugoslavia, Ireland, and now Ukraine, who are experiencing war. So I doubt it if it's the normal situation to live a lifetime without having to deal with these problems that we have in Rat Island in the book, where there's a breakdown of rule of law, for example. And I didn't write that inspired by the riot on Capitol Hill in Washington D.C. It was more like a shock to me that when I saw that on the TV, I saw that, well, this is like taken out of the short story Rat Island in my collection. You know, life imitates art. But to answer your question, still having that in mind, and I mean the next 5 years now, having in mind that people are still voting for Orban in Hungary, and let's see what happens in France with Le Pen. I think that the next 5 years, 10 years looks bleak, but you know, in the long run, I guess when my daughter is my age now, she is in a better world than the world is right now.
En ese sentido, ¿qué cree que?
In this sense, do you think that we can be proud of reality when compared to what the fiction is actually forecasting? Because the forecasts in fiction are quite more catastrophic.
Yeah, well, I don't know if proud is the word. I think that we create a society that works for most people because that is more efficient. There is I just read some research that people who are kind and who are almost naively kind, they have better lives than people who strive to, you know, just fulfill their own needs. And that means that, you know, we are actually probably more happy as a people if we live in soft, social, democratic societies where we share stuff than we are in, let's say, Russia. There was a poll in Russia some years ago where you could vote, would you rather live in a small country with a higher standard of living than in a big, powerful country that is feared by your neighbors? And most Russians voted for living in a country where they were feared by their neighbors. Now that is disturbing, of course, and I don't know what that says about Russians, but hopefully I think that at the end of the day, also Russians are a people that would like to see happy people around them and not only being happy themselves. So I think that we are, at the end of the day, we are social creatures. We thrive better if people around us thrive.
Otro de los temas.
Other of the recurring topics in your short stories is memory. Memory is very much present in the stories that go a little bit deeper in science fiction and those that do not go so much into science fiction. Is this because we are finding to cope with ourselves, or because we are finding it hard for others to deal with what we are? Why do you find this difficulty that many of your characters are encountering? This is something that haunts them, actually, the memory aspect of it.
Okay, I'm not sure I got the question. Could you rephrase it?
Sí.
Why do we find it so difficult to live with our own memories, as it happens to some of the characters in your stories?
Well, I think that we. Have you ever had the feeling when you wake up during the night and you remember something from your youth, something that was really embarrassing, and it was like 30 years ago, but still you go, oh no, did I really say that? And I think that, I don't know if this is answering your question, but, because I'm still not sure I got it, but I think that shame and regret are for me strong emotions, and it's something that inspired me in my writing. I'm not sure I'm answering your question now, but
Sí.
I think that the bad memories are, to me as a writer, those are more valuable than the happy memories. The happy memories I store in one place, and I probably have more happy memories than bad memories, but it's the bad memories that are my fuel for writing.
Vale.
Okay. I think that you have actually answered my question. Thank you. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the number of cultural references and scientific references that we see in the book. This is somewhat overwhelming because they are really pertinent, they're really relevant. They do not. They make the reader stop and think. We could talk about several of them, but I would like to focus on two of them. One of them is the theory of the string theory and the possibility of time traveling. Do you think that in the future we will be able to travel not only with books and through the movies, but also to other dimensions? Because when I was reading one of your short stories, maybe we are closer to that than we thought.
Well, those questions are so complicated, and I'm just, in these stories, I'm just scratching in the surface and trying to use my fantasy to see, okay, so if this would be possible, what would be the possible consequences? And you have, of course, the ever-present dilemma of, can you go back and kill your grandfather? Because then you wouldn't be born, of course. But there's a solution to that, and that is that you have an infinite number of parallel universes. But just when you get to the point of saying infinite, it's impossible for the brain to grasp that. That is not infinite. It's not very many. It's infinite. It's a different concept that we are not able to grasp. So I will have to. I won't even try to answer your question whether I believe or whether I think that is something is possible. I have no idea. I just like to play around with the consequences, the what ifs.
The other reference that I think it's essential is one of the main stories in The Jealousy Man, and I wanted to leave it to the end, is the reference to Charles Dickens in the story of Audrey, who is a famous writer who needs to get onto a stage to in front and place himself into an audience that is really willing to listen to him, and he thinks a lot about Charles Dickens and how what he wrote actually had an influence on what happened in the society. Would you say this is still happening? Do you think that literature is still changing our minds and changing societies, or would you say it doesn't?
Well, I think that probably movies are changing the society more than literature, simply because more people are watching movies than are reading novels. I think that there's a few very popular books that have maybe moved society an inch or two. For example, I think that Stieg Larsson's books, they moved society a little bit with his feministic agenda. He's not my favorite crime writer, but he's the most read. So simply from that fact, he and I'm sympathetic to his political agenda. But I think it's right now seems like if you want to change the world, you better write a good pop song.
At any rate, when I interviewed you 2 or 3 years ago, I asked you more or less the same question, and you told me that beyond social change that is important, you thought that it was key as an aspiration, as a single aspiration, the entertainment per se, to be able to entertain. And you said to me, do you think it's a minor thing to entertain the audience? And I've reflected on this often during the pandemic and the lockdowns. Do you still agree with yourself with what you said back then?
I think so. I think that entertainment is it has sort of a bad reputation. But if we look at what you do after work, I mean, seeking knowledge. For example, reading about string theory. Then, for me, that's entertainment. It's not nothing I'm going to use for something to make a living. Well, actually, I can use it to write stories. So I do make a living from consuming entertainment, I guess. But I think that being interested in traveling, for example. Right now I have a daughter who is 21 years old, and she's been traveling to Nepal, and she's starting to travel and experience the world on her own. That is, of course, a privilege that you have, being born in the part of the world where she has been born, that you can travel and see the world. On the other hand, it's a tremendous learning experience to see what the world is all about, how people live, what is the human condition in most parts of the world. But you could also define that as entertainment. It's not something she needs to do, but I think that the role of entertainment in the sort of the extended meaning of the word is very important. So I think that me, as a writer of entertainment literature, crime literature, I have an important job and also an obligation to use that the audience I have to direct their attention to things that I think is important. Now, for anyone who has read my books, they know that I seldom point to a solution. I'm not like Stieg Larsson says, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But I'm hopefully putting out asking some interesting questions. And if I'm doing my job right, I'm leaving it up to the audience to just think about it. And hopefully they will come up with some good answers that are not provided by the books.
Muy bien, pues...
Very good. Well, we're going to leave a few minutes that we have before we start the signature of books for the audience to ask their questions. these questions. We have very little time, and we are all great admirers of Joe, but I would like you to ask very short questions.
¿Nadie?
Nobody? Because I have another one. Okay, I see a raised hand over there.
Sí, quería preguntar.
I would like to ask Mr. Nesbø if he considers that crimes derived or stemming out of jealousy that come out from inequalities that we see, economic inequalities, what do you think is the reason for this, and what would be the solution for this, and if you would think that a Bitcoin economy would be more in agreement with our nature?
Well, I think that it's an interesting question, because if you would think that, and to a certain extent it's true that in societies where we have more equality, you have less crime. But it's also the fact that in societies where you have more equality, then you have a higher general standard of living. And then you have some countries like Mexico, for example, just to take a country where you have very brutal crimes and a crime-ridden society where crime is a part of most people's everyday life. But then you have India, where you have an even more, difference between riches and poor, and you have sort of a religion that holds society in check in a way that people accept the inequalities. So it's hard to tell. I don't have like a qualified answer for that, but I think that most people would probably agree that in general inequalities are bad for the crime rate.
¿Alguna pregunta más?
Any other questions?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to know when Harry Hole is coming back.
He's in Norwegian. He's hopefully coming back later this year or next year. So I'm working on a Harry Hole novel right now. It's going to be called Blood Moon, and yes, hopefully, if things go smoothly, you will see it in Spanish. What do you say, next year? The year after that? March next year. Okay, thank you. I have a deadline.
¿Alguna pregunta más?
Any other question here? And then we'll go back to you to finish for today. Hello. My question, I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it. It's, what did you think about the movie based on the snowman? I don't know if there are any other film versions of your novels, and if there are any others, what is your opinion on the adaptations?
I haven't seen the snowman. And people tell me I don't need to see it. I have those seen Headhunters, so that is probably a better movie. So yeah, Headhunters. There's a few films based on my children's books also, and there's a new Italian movie coming out now based on I don't know what's called in More Blood, Midnight Sun. It's I think it's called in Spanish. Yep.
Sol de sangre, ¿no? Pues una última pregunta.
Just one question that we had here, and I'm afraid we need to wrap this up now. Good afternoon. More than a question, I would like to take one of your sentences. You have said that Stieg Larsson is not one of your favorite authors, and I was wondering if you can tell us who would be in the crime genre, who would be your greatest inspiration before you became a writer, and once that you have already been published, if there's any author that has surprised you or impressed you in particular in this genre?
Well, I think that I was Jim Thompson, which I mentioned earlier. He was my favorite. He was a contemporary writer of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. He's my favorite writer. He would write The American Psycho 30 years before Bret Easton Ellis did so, and he's just fantastic. He can pull off the trick to make you somehow sympathize with a sociopath now I think there's a lot of good writers. I think that Dennis Lehane is really good. I think that I didn't read Stephen King until some years ago, so I realized that he's pretty good. There's it's not like I don't read that much crime really, so and of course crime fiction also has a bad reputation in many places, and deservedly so. I mean, there's a lot of crap that is being written in the genre, but there's also some gems, some really jewels there in there, I think. And yes.
Muy bien.
Very well. Well, thank you very much to all of you, and in particular to Joe. He will be signing books now. He will be signing copies of his latest book at the end of the corridor. I would like you not to come up to the stage and refrain him from going to the other side to sign the books, so we can speed this up a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.